The next thing about electric vehicles is which is important is that they're still vehicles, so they're still going to be on our roads. And one of the key problems we have, certainly living in cities, and I have the pleasure and misfortune of living just a few streets away from here, is gridlock. And electric cars will not solve the problem of gridlock, which means that we have to be thinking beyond the car solution. Now, many people give Belgium and certainly Brussels not much credit, but I'm actually quite happy and proud to be in Brussels because I have fantastic communication channels, better than London, better than Paris, better I think than most other cities. I have the ability to get a Velo, which is a free bicycle, and cycle anywhere I want to, and I would like to have more and more bicycle stations where we can have more and more communal bikes, and that's actually saved me so much money. Since I've been in Belgium for the last 6 years, I've not lost a single bicycle. I've never had a single bicycle stolen from me, whereas in London I had 9 bicycles stolen, so I'm already quids in. That's low carbon, it's good for my health as well, but it only becomes really healthy for me if we get rid of all the tailpipe exhausts on the high streets. The next thing that we need to be looking at is the next thing we need to be looking at are the kind of the other policy drivers that we want to focus in on. So in order to drive the kind of change that we need to do, it's not just thinking about the infrastructure, but it's looking at all the dynamics that we have within transport. So a lot of work is focused quite rightly on electrification of surface transport, but we need to be looking at other players who are able to drive bigger swathes of change. So for example, I'm throwing some ideas out. Electrification targets for supermarkets. They're a hugely important part of the high street. They are one of the key vehicles, ironically enough, for driving behavioural acceptance. Whatever we buy in our supermarkets, we trust our supermarkets to give us good value, good quality. They're always open, they're always there, they're the most trustworthy brands we have. They have huge logistic chains behind them in terms of transporting products from a central hub into the big mega stores, but also the tiny outlets that they have. Giving these guys a target, allowing them to invest in and drive forward a public acceptance of electrification is very, very important, because their acceptance will allow us to become more and more comfortable with the new future that we're looking at. And at the same time, they'll be able to give us the option to diversify our transport means. So it's not just looking at electric cars, but also manual powered bicycles, walking, buses, so on and so forth. Everything needs to be done in an integrated way. And this integration needs to come from looking at the way in which we approach car manufacturers as well. So as I've mentioned before, we need to give car manufacturers a long-term vision. They need to have zero CO2 cars in their horizons now. Electrification is important, but unless we get rid of the tailpipe quicker and quicker, our movement isn't going to be as quick as we need to be, bearing in mind that the Chinese and the US are very close. So I would say that when it comes to the discussion that's happening at the moment around the 95 grams, we should be looking at a much higher target, but more importantly, we should be looking at a target for 2025. And certainly 60 grams is within horizon, considering that cars are already at 79 grams today. At the same time, in Europe, we're having a much bigger discussion on what our 2030 horizon needs to look like, which means we should also be looking at a 2030 CO2 target. And I suggested 40 grams, but maybe that's going to be obsolete because the market is going to drive itself so quickly, or that we're just going to buy Chinese and American cars. That I don't know. But we certainly need to give our innovators, our manufacturers, a chance to be competitive by 2030 if we're serious about our economy. I want to say two more things about the internal market aspect. Firstly, I you know, as an NGO, as a member of civil society, we look at decarbonisation in a very positive way. We want it now, and it's always very easy to be critical. And I think one of the things I want to highlight from the Commission's recent announcement, the directive on infrastructure, is that actually this is a good thing. We like it. it's a step in the right direction. We just need more. And one of the things we need to do is to convince the Commission that the 60% greenhouse gas reduction target, which Laura mentioned, is very ambitious. It may be ambitious for the transport community, but for the climate community, it's actually very weak. And it doesn't deliver what we need to do. It's effectively asking us to swim halfway through halfway between France and the UK. The answer is you'll drown. We've got to go all the way to decarbonisation, and that means that we need to go back and look at the graphic that the Commission has, which Laura presented on the different alternative fuels, and a lot of them just simply do not work. Biofuels doesn't have a future in any of the transport sectors, with the exception of aviation. But again, if we were to stimulate aviation and innovation within the aviation sectors, then that may mean that we reduce our burden upon liquid hydrocarbons and maybe look towards electrification there. But for the shipping sector, most of European history is based upon using wind power to sail all over the world, and innovation in that sector is very, very important. So coming forward with some kind of maritime emission directive, bearing in mind we have problems with the aviation directive, but focusing on innovation, trying to get that technology driver and the technologists thinking about decarbonisation is an important thing, and we need to keep that on the horizon. The final point I was going to make was around hydrogen. One of the difficulties is that we may lock ourselves into an infrastructure that actually isn't low carbon and isn't the infrastructure that we need. So there has to be some degree of a market approach to allowing consumers to choose which infrastructure they would choose. And certainly when it comes to hydrogen, the choice needs to be presented very clearly towards local communities about the real cost of hydrogen infrastructure compared to battery plug-ins. So let me just conclude by saying electrification is good, it's important, but it needs to happen quicker. And more importantly, it cannot be confined to vehicles. And finally, this is policy driven. So unless we get the policy architecture right, we're still going to be talking about incremental increases when around the world our competitors are moving much quicker than we are. Thank you very much.